Welcome everyone! Today's game is a real classic and it features one of the fathers of hypermodern chess, Richard Réti. He unfortunately died at a young age, but he did leave a very fine chess legacy. Not only was he a very inventive player, he was also a great endgame study composer. In this game against Bogoljubow, he also played one of his inventions, the Réti opening, and he won the Brilliancy prize for it in the 1924 tournament in New York. Just sit back and enjoy. Réti had white and opened with knight to f3, very flexible move, knight to f6, c4, e6, g3. As I said, Réti was among the first hypermodern players, and hypermodern play is when you control the center with your pieces instead of with your pawns. That's why white wants to fianchetto the bishop. After d5, bishop g2 was played. Bishop d6, just standard development taking place, and after both sides castled, b3 was played, so Réti also wants to fianchetto his dark squared bishop, which makes a lot of sense now that black put his center pawns on light squares. But now Bogoljubow went rook to e8, which prepares e6, e5, but he ends up never playing that, and because of that his light squared bishop will just be a bystander this game. I'm not sure why he didn't just play e5 right now. In general terms it makes sense to break out before white's pieces are well set up, but the e-pawn is also sufficiently defended. White can trade on d5 and develop the bishop, but after knight to c6 covering the pawn, d3 and rook to e8, I'm left wondering what's wrong with black's position. He has a nice center pawn, his pieces are fine, and his light squared bishop will get in the game. But that didn't happen. Black went rook to e8, bishop b2 as expected, knight from b to d7 just developing, and again supporting e6, e5, even though e5 was also still possible here. But after d4, white basically stopped black from playing e5. If black would try e5 anyway, then white could play c4, c5, and after the bishop leaves, e5 would be hanging again. Maybe that's another reason for black playing c6 here, in order to play bishop c7 if needed and don't lose track of the e5 pawn. However, after knight from b to d2, Bogoljubow apparently gave up on the idea of playing e5 and went for knight to e4. It was possible, I suppose, to again go e5 at this point, but after cd5, cd5, d takes e5, knight takes, bishop takes, and rook takes e5, black will be stuck with an isolated pawn, which isn't the end of the world, but it is a positional disadvantage. Going back, knight to e4 was black's choice, and probably that is the better move. White couldn't live with that knight and traded it off, and after knight to e5, black defended the e-pawn with f5. He has to do that. If knight to f6 was tried, then queen to c2 and the pawn will be lost. So f5, and here a very instructive move by Réti, f3. Again, black has trouble developing his light squared bishop, but if allowed black will play b6, bishop b7 and c5, so white has to take action before that happens. After pawn takes f3, Réti took back with the bishop. That way he can still go for e2, e4 and open up the position some more. And now Bogoljubow played queen to c7, putting more pressure on the knight on e5, so he's trying to force white to trade on d7, but that probably wasn't the best move. Maybe it was worth considering taking on e5, and after the recapture, first flick in this check, and then go bishop to d7, and then he can develop the a-rook after queen to e7. The light squared bishop still isn't great, but at least here white wouldn't have an imposing pawn center. After queen to c7, white got to do what he wanted, because after the trade, he got to play e4, and he simply got a very nice pawn center, and it's well supported by his pieces too. Bogoljubow didn't want to sit around and wisely decided to strike back in the center. His position isn't good whatever he does, and at least by making the game more complicated, there may be some practical chances. He does have to worry about white's bishops though, because they are more effectively placed than black's. Now, c5, good move, cramping black's position some more and loosening black's grip on the e5 square. After bishop f8, queen to c2 was played. I like that move. Réti doesn't try to cash in immediately, but simply keeps his positional advantage. If Réti would have played pawn takes f5, to go for tricks after bishop takes c6 and rook takes f5, then black's pieces would gain activity. After g6, rook f2, rook from a to d8 would be played. Black's pieces are fine now and the c5 pawn may also become weak. In short, white just ruined his good position. Therefore, queen to c2, not only attacking f5 but also defending c5, so d takes e5 is also a threat now. That's why black took on d4, e takes, rook from a to d8, bringing his final piece in the game. White could simply take on d4 now, but I like what Réti did. Bishop to h5. The whole game he's been better positionally, but when there's a chance for an attack, he does go for it. The rook is attacked, so rook to e5. Now white did take on d4, and here unfortunately black made a fatal mistake. He decided he didn't want to be down material and took on f5, but that allowed a very nice forced win. Black's last chance to defend was rook to d5, although after queen c4 pinning the rook, king to h8, bishop f3, rook takes f5 and bishop b4, black's pieces are so bad, surely in the end white has to be winning here too. Instead, rook takes f5 was played, but then rook takes, bishop takes and queen takes f5. Now objectively speaking, black should remain a piece down and not take on d4, but then you'll still lose, except more slowly. Bogoljubow did win his piece back, but then rook to f1, threatening with queen takes f8 mate, therefore rook to d8, but it doesn't matter, bishop f7 check forces the king in the corner, and that means that after bishop to e8, very nice move, the bishop is again attacked twice. Black had no choice but to resign, because even if he takes on e8, now taking twice on f8 would still result in checkmate. Very classy game by Richard Réti. First he outplayed black strategically. Bogoljubow had chronic issues with his light squared bishop because he didn't break out with e5. That meant multiple of his pieces weren't well placed, that made him vulnerable to a direct attack, and as soon as he got the chance, Réti found a very pleasing forced win. Anyway, please let me know in the comments what you think of this classic game. If you enjoyed, please leave a like to the video, I'd really appreciate it, and also consider subscribing to the channel. I'll be seeing you guys again soon, and take care.